Wrecker, my brother, what's going on?
Nick, man, good to see you.
Good to see you. Hey, so we're in the age of AI, right?
Yep.
Uh,
It feels like all of our episodes are about AI now. We got to change
yeah.
that.
Well, but it's like the elephant in every room. Everywhere you go, it's AI. But what is AI? As you and I have discussed, it's this set of technologies that is only as strong as the data you feed into it, right?
That's true. Yeah.
It's trained on data. So this idea of data really is taking the foreground. We've talked to Yanis Kallinikos, we've talked to others, and data is so you and I were at Academy of Management. We were sitting there. You gave your your presentation wasn't bad, but your slides
My
were awful.
argument was good. My slides were bad. That's a huge difference.
Your slides were awful. But yeah, you had interesting thoughts. But during that meeting, there was a presentation,
Oh, yeah, I know.
uh, and it blew both of us away.
Absolutely.
And it was Marta's presentation. Welcome, Marta. I would attempt to say your last name. So let's figure it out. It's Stelesmak.
Stelmaszak.
Stelmasak. Stelmasak.
Stelmaszak.
Stelmaszak. Stelmaszak.
Stelmasak.
Stelmaszak. Perfect. Thank you
It's
so
Stelmasak.
like
much.
Nmaszak, just Stelmaszak.
Stelmasak. But SZ pronounced cha. So what nationality is that?
Uh, I'm originally Polish.
So that's Polish.
Ah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be in Hungarian, it would be Stelmaszak. So you would pronounce the SZ as an S instead of a ch. So, all right. Well, welcome aboard. But yeah, we wanted to talk to you because Jan and I have both become your big fans ever since we saw you
Absolutely.
present. Uh,
And before that,
well, well, it's one of those things where this data, you and Alexi and some others are really leading the charge in this data resurgence and people who are thinking deeply about data and Giannis and I don't know who else is part of this gang.
Yeah, I think that there has been many of us popping up in different places. So we have the Theorizing Data and AI workshop where we have Christina Alaimo, Lauren Bardenberg, and others getting involved in that. We have the data studies at CBS.
Hmm.
And that is Olivia Benfeld, Annika Schroeder as well. And then we have some of the
it's
things
all
that
girls.
Yeah.
Annika, right?
Alexi's a
Lauren,
boy.
Marta,
I'll
no,
I'll get to
And
that. Yeah,
Alexi. Yeah,
we have
okay.
Alexi in the data studies bibliography, and recently also Daisy Shu joined us
Yes.
in this effort. And we keep seeing more and more of this interest pop up. So I would say, there's something to what you Nick said earlier that we're in the age of AI, but data through that is gaining increased relevance. And you said that all of this AI is trained on data. And I would go even further. I would say all of this AI is made of data. It goes
Oh,
more than just training. And it kind of flips the script for us, right? Because then we have AI that is made of data as building blocks. And I
yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's why we're so interested, especially in the age of AI.
Yeah, we were always interested in data, but the what we did and the computing was somehow separate. Computing was it was the rationale that we had, the processes that we had, and we would code that. And then data was the thing that it moved
It
and
was the fuel,
stored.
right? Like it's the ingredient. You worried
Yeah.
Yeah.
about the algorithm, the procedures that they represented, and then you chuck data in there,
Well, no,
basically.
I think it was so there are three generations, I would say, of thinking about data in my career. The first was like the IT generation of thinking about data, which is organizations need to store data. Sure, we analyze data a little bit, but it's all about the software. The algorithms were about the routines, about the processes, about what you did with data and how you process the data. Then there became kind of the big data age, starting around 2010, which was now we have all this data, so now we're going to analyze it and we're going to generate, predictions and that sort of thing. But now we're like in the third, I don't know, big step in data. And this is where the data, where we no longer code the algorithms in the sense with the data that is right the data that exists generates patterns that no human maybe even understands right? As far as procedural knowledge. So I don't, is that fair, Marta? Is this
Yeah,
a decent characterization of the three ages of data? And I'm
I
doing a
think
bad
so.
job with the current age.
I think so. And I think that what I would add to this was to say that early in what you described as this first generation, we sort of took data for granted, right? So our interest was how to make the systems that would push the data around. And
Mm.
I think that then we got to the big data age where we sort of started thinking it's not only the systems, also the data, how the data is and what it does. And now it's as if the data was coming to the fore. It's almost as if we have these algorithms and the systems, and we're now looking at what is that, the data, the material that we used to take for granted, how is it different and what it does. And if I were to have make my attempt at trying to say what is different now is I would probably use a few words to try to describe it. And one of them would be innovation. And for me, it's an interesting thought to think about how data innovation, which is the ability to change data in ways that can lead to innovative outcomes, is something
Mhm.
that is new. I think that we haven't thought about this before, right? We thought about innovation as how can we change our systems? But what if we can think about innovation as how is it we can change our data that can get us access to new ways of seeing the world, new ways of thinking, new products and new services?
I look at this, it's an interesting thought, right? Innovation in data, in the sense that we can think about recombining and generating new meaning in data in ways that we haven't considered. So I would probably phrase this a little bit differently. When I think about the role of data over the three ages that Nick just defined, I think in the beginning it's like this. In the beginning, we worried about the systems that we could place on top of data, and especially about the algorithms that were processing the data. But this was an age where data was scarce. We didn't have a lot of data about all sorts of phenomena in the real world. Yeah, data back in these days were data that we had in transaction processing systems.
We had to
You
create
know,
our data,
we had to
right?
create data, and because it was scarce and was costly to have this data or create this data, we had this emphasis on data quality. We wanted it to be timely, accurate, consistent, clear, complete. These sorts of notions that we had in the 90s about good data. We always knew that bad data lead to bad outcomes, right? Garbage in, garbage out. But in the days of enterprise systems and SAPs and Oracle and these sorts of things, and it was the data wasn't abundant.
Do we don't care about data quality anymore. We just assume
Well,
it's all
hang
bad
on. Let
quality,
me
right?
make my point. Right. So then we moved into this big data. Big data then became a different. Now data was abundant. How do we deal with this? And then I agree with you, Nick. We stopped worrying about data quality because in an age of abundance, timeliness and accuracy and precision, who cared if you had a lot of it? You could make sense of it. You get the context. You get enough meaning out of a lot of data and sort of establish relevance this way. It may not be perfect and precise, but
No,
get
not
so
even
much of it.
it's we a lot of what we do assumes the data is not quality, right? And then
Yeah.
we have to do
Yeah.
corrections
So
for
and,
bias
and
or
so
whatever.
I'm making a very long-winded point. So we forgot about data quality. Is the point in the big data. Now we have, and I agree with Mara here. Now we have this age where we innovate in data, we generate, etc., and we're losing all sense of connection between data and any real-world accuracy. Right, so this we call this hallucinations, we call this whatever. Now we have a very different problem because we can't establish any connection to real world meaning anymore. So and now here's the interesting observation that I wanted to throw out. Mara, you and Alexi and I think Kalle and Daisy last year at AOM, not this year. You did this data innovation in data PDW, I think it was, and there's actually a report on that, so people can read up on this. And I was there too, and both Janis and me and some others made the point is that everyone in the room had literally forgotten about the work in the 90s. And I think it's because of the shift that I just now long-windedly try to explain, that we've forgotten all the work that we had about data, its relation to semantics and meaning and quality, because in between we just were flooded with data, and we I don't know what the right word is. We sort of translated it to information, and we stopped worrying about how good it is, in a sense. And now we can't even make that point anymore. Would you agree with this? It was striking that we I remember in the workshop that a lot of us said, like, but there's this great book from the 90s and there's this great book from the 80s. Haven't you read that? And everyone was like, I've never even heard of that thing.
So I took this PDW very seriously. And after that, I had a long list of homework to do. And that included catching up on all of these papers and all of these books. And I read them. I read, for example, Kent on data and reality.
Yes.
I read, the
1970s, yeah.
Hirschheim and et al. 1995 about the title is data modeling, but it's a theory of data, right? And I read up on all of the different papers, trying to make sense out of it. So that is also in part what has been reflected in the data studies bibliography, because if you look at it, there are some papers in there that don't have data in the title, they have information. And there are also some papers in there that are from, that bit of the literature that I don't know if we have forgotten, or some of us maybe didn't immediately connect or see. So I kind of worked through all of this, and personally did have a big Excel on my hard drive where I have an analysis of all of these papers, and here is what they say about it and so on.
Marta, you mentioned a bibliography, so I don't think people know what you're talking about. You and Alexi have basically put together some sort of repository somewhere on the internet that has all the it's a bibliography. Can you want to tell us about that? Because and we'll put a link to it right in the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So it all started about a year and a half ago when Alexi and I started discussing that it would be a very helpful resource to put all of these data-related papers together. And initially, we did what Jan just described, which is we kind of put together the obvious suspects, if you'd like. So the literature that we knew and the literature that for us was something that we were familiar with. And then on reflection, and the more we started learning, we started branching out and going back. So now we have this curation of right now about 150 papers in IS and management journals. And we went back to pretty much the beginning, the foundation of our field. And we read through these papers thinking, what is the new thing, the aha moment that we have reading this paper that tells us something new about data as an object of research? So that was sort of our inclusion criteria. And then we brought it up to today, and now every time an issue comes out, we read through the papers and add them in there. So that has been the bulk of the effort. We also have a collection of books, which I can say I love reading books. So I read through all of them and made short summaries and added them there. We also have teaching cases, which I think is super interesting and important. So we listed all teaching cases that are related to data up there. And we've been running this as a bibliography for a while. And then we decided it would be really nice to add a blog part to it.
Yeah, and that's my favorite, of course.
Of course, and it is mine as well, right? So we started adding initially a couple of our own writings, but then we started meeting all of these fantastic scholars working on everything related to data. So we started inviting them to write guest posts, and we've had some incredible contributions and great insights in there. And we also have another section on the blog post, which is recommendations from senior scholars on data studies must-reads. And that is also great to get to know what inspired others in their own work on data.
All right, I'm going to give you my must-read, and I'm sure this is in your bibliography.
Please do.
But so this is the first academic paper I remember reading. Now, I might have read others, but I came from practice, and then I read, it was Dale Goodhue with Weibo and Laurie Kirsch, 1992, The Impact of Data Integration on the Cost and Benefits of Information Systems, right? It's an MISQ, 1992. It's a data integration paper. And first of all, it's beautiful. I have a feeling that this has affected my thinking since, because I do research on sometimes on processes, and I have this idea of like decoupling. I really think I got it all from that paper, and everything I've done has been like a footnote or an elaboration on that paper. And it's about data integration. It's about subunits and organizations integrating the data across subunits and what that looks like, the processing around that. Uh, Really cool. The interesting thing about this is so first of all, I think people should read the story, and I think it's a story that probably still holds if people were to go back and read it about, around data integration. But imagine this. So this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I think it's a fun side story. So I don't know, it was 2004 or something when I started my PhD. Read that paper. Fast forward 5 years, 4 years, whatever. I'm a PhD student. I'm at the University of Georgia, and I meet Dale Goodhue. I'm going to have breakfast with him, and he's working there at the time. He's retired since. But here's a guy who I only not only read that paper, I read some of his other papers, but that paper had such an impact on my thinking. I go to have breakfast with him, and in the morning, he had printed out my entire job talk paper, and he went through it, and he had written on the margins, and he had like underlined things, and he was ready at breakfast to before I did my presentation to just really get into the paper and discuss it with me and discuss the various elements. It was like unbelievable. And I don't know if you guys have done job talks and that sort of thing. No one reads your paper. No one, right? It's like when you present is the first time that it was really a remarkable thing, and he was a remarkable person. That was cool. Well, anyway, that's my story. But we have to put
That's
that,
great.
Marta. I'm going to put a senior scholar post, and I'm going to put that paper up there. You know, the other one I would do is Kalle wrote a book. Do you have this on your in your bibliography? He wrote a book with Hershheim and Klein on
Yeah, that's on there.
philosophical foundations of both system development and data modeling. Did he? Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
it's
really
there
cool
in the
book.
book section. Yeah, I really like it. I have it. I have a digital copy of that book that are scanned PDFs, and I
Mhm.
got it when around the time when I was doing my PhD. And
You
I
just
don't
admitted to
remember.
pirating a book. You pirated the book.
I have a few chapters,
Okay.
so I think that's acceptable use. And these chapters have highlights and underlines and notes of several people added to it layer by layer.
Oh, interesting.
And then I have that version, and it's fantastic to see uh, these couple of chapters with the notes and reflections and highlights of different people and how it changed their thinking and what it made them think. So it's a wonderful resource.
Yeah. All right. So the other thing, Marta, that I wanted to bring up with you, and this is the thing that blew me away. Now you're talking about innovation, which I have to think about because, I study innovation. I haven't thought of, I mean, of course, I've thought of thinking about data and how it might lead to more innovative generative tools and that sort of thing. So I played around with that in some of my thinking in some papers. But the thing that blew me away that you presented at AOM was when you started talking about meaning. And we always think, and there's the data hierarchy or whatever, where it's what is it, data, information, knowledge, meaning, and data is always the unprocessed data. Information is some sort of processed data. Knowledge is some sort of knowledge, data in use and practical. And then we always kind of throw out uh, wisdom and I guess at the top and meaning and the meaning of the data and something underneath that has, but it's always the fuzziest part, right? It's the thing that we kind of hand wave away, the wisdom, the meaning, those are all, it's knowledge, process data, data. So I don't know, where's your thinking at meaning right now? Are you writing this up? Are you playing with the idea of meaning behind the data and meaning and AI?
Yeah, I think that is such an interesting point, and I have several thoughts around that as you were talking. I think that one of the things is what I would say is for me, this is part of where innovation in data lies, because I often try to do this simple thought experiment. When we change the data format, let's say we always used to record something as a Boolean value, zeros and ones, right? And we change that format into, let's say, a string. So now we can record characters. That
Say,
changes.
yeah, say gender.
for example, right? And that's one of the examples that I think about. And this changes the kind of meaning that the data can represent at a very basic level, right? When we move from a one way of trying to represent the world in data to a completely different one that gives us a bigger scope, and we can think what is that we can do with this new meaning and the new way of how we represent the world in the data.
And that's
See,
because what is data? Data is some sort of codification of something. It's either a number or a word, right? Or I guess there are images and unstructured things. But when we think about data, at least we'll start with just numbers and words. And those are codifications or representations of something, right? So if it's a representation of something, then it necessarily has the kind of processed scaffold, right? You mentioned gender. If I say I give you two boxes, male and female, uh, you get if I give you nationalities, the way I give you nationalities, I could give you European American, I could give you West East, I could give you so many different ways to maybe organize nationalities. The moment I give you an organization scheme is the moment I've imbued meaning into the data.
well, and it is very fundamental, right? So take, I don't know, take Israel Gaza Strip, right? So is Palestine a country? Is that one of the drop-down options in my data box? And in an age where, we have sort of digital systems that are fundamental to most things, then you either have that nationality or you don't. Like you literally change the meaning of what is my home country, or, do I have a home country, or God knows what else. I think that's the point that you're making, Marta, right?
Yes, yeah. So I would then add to this to say that if we talk about them as classification schemes, then define what is that we can do and how we can act, and what is that we can create in organizations. And I remember another example. Some time ago, there were changes being made in how ethnic and national backgrounds were grouped together in categories, right?
Yeah.
And just a change away from putting together certain countries that culturally had very little to do with each other and separating this out in different groups this was in the context of higher education, allowed universities to then realize that they were actually tracking outcomes for these groups based on their ethnicity, in ways that did not reflect what was actually happening. So the moment they changed that classification scheme, they changed their processes, they changed the level of support that they offered, their programming, their targeting. So for me, this is innovation. And what triggered that innovation in how these organizations worked was a change in how they recorded data.
Yeah. And follow me with this, right? So I also think about the relationship between data and meaning. And I also think it has fundamentally changed, but probably through a different mechanism. So less the what you're to me saying is like what options I give in the creation of data then impacts the meaning I can later imbue and sort of process and create that way. I get that, and I am fully with you. The way that I think about it is that, again, back in the old days where we had the sparse data and data quality was a fundamental design consideration, we also had a fairly explicit relational function between data and meaning. And with meaning, I mean something that we say it really represents something that is accurately, timely, clearly, consistently representing the real world. So we've always had representation of functions, but we also always had an explicit reference. Now, there has been lots of debates where that referent is coming from, or whether that's the real world or some social construction thereof, etc. But irrespective of what the referent point exactly meant, we always wanted to have something in our system, the data, that would be really representing the real world or some part of it, etc. How we got there is always going to be difficult. And I think what we've lost now is that referent point. We now have data without any explicit, or if you want, only an implicit, very, very fallible, very brittle connection to reality or some aspect thereof, whether it's socially constructed, objectively existent, whatever, right? So if you think about the data that went into the large language models that are fueling AI. Now, of course, that's data that exists, and that's data that's basically everything we ever put into the internet. but not all of that is connected to the real world, right? And now we say, oh my God, we have what these systems are producing are hallucinations, which is a funny word, I think, because that implies that it should have been a more realistic representation, but it's not. But how could it be, given that we never established that link anymore? We never worried about the link. We took everything from Reddit and, Wikipedia, whatever we could find, whether or not that had any meaning, or not it has meaning, but what meaning it had was irrelevant to the design. And hence we have systems that are producing more data, innovating with data, but without any relationship to meaning anymore. Now, some could say they create meanings, right? That's what Yang would say. They're semantic machines. They're creating semantics. But I always think they're just purely syntactic machines. We're playing around with codified information, zeros and ones essentially. And there could be anything and nothing. And that creates all sorts of problems because we're losing, we can't establish any semantic anymore. We can agree on some of it. But if we start losing that, then that's the issue. Do you see where I'm going with this? Does that make any sense?
Dude, there's a lot you just said.
I know.
And I'm not sure I understand all of it. But I think one of the things you said, or one of the things I heard was, it's like just this big mishmash of data and there's no real coherence to it. I'm not sure about that. I think there is. There's a classification system on the internet. I guess it's trained a lot, for example, these large language models on Reddit and Wikipedia. There's a classification system on Wikipedia that reflects the discourse of some segment. Now, it's not a one-to-one map of society, but it's certain. Reddit is also, it's a classification scheme. I'd be less worried about whether there's meaning and something kind of as part of it structuring it, because I think there is. I would be saying that it's a subset of what we'd want in an LLM. And it's the subset of things, of human knowledge, that's on Wikipedia and on Reddit. And, there are other things outside of that. So I think it probably does a pretty good job. You look at Wikipedia, it probably does a pretty good job expressing the discourse around a topic in Wikipedia, especially if you look at the talk pages and stuff. Now, I don't know if these LLMs are trained on the talk pages, but I suspect that they are. And those are, these are classification schemes. They're historic, and Bowker and Starr. I don't know, Marta, is Bowker and Starr, the classification book, is that in your data? So it's like the thing I remember about the Bowker and Starr book is that it's historical, that there is no universal classification. The classification is always historical. It's always very social, and it's path dependent.
Sure.
So Wikipedia, I would argue, is a pretty good at any point in time, a pretty good. Of all the topics in Wikipedia, it's probably a pretty good capture of the path-dependent state of our discourse, right?
And sorry, I don't want to make this we don't need to debate this point, but I would disagree with that because
Really?
You're right. What you're saying is you're making an argument saying that the data quality is a reasonably good representation of, say, our knowledge and our classification that we have,
Of the things
etc.
that it represents.
Of the things that it represents. And I'm saying, well, that may or may not be true. First of all, you don't know. You just admitted we assume that. We don't know that. It has not been an explicit design criterion. And now, as we have systems that are creating data, they're generating all sorts of data. In these, we want to use in certain contexts, some of which semantics, real-world representation is fundamentally important. Right? So, simple example, when you go to Google search, you now get an AI search. And more often than not, it's gibberish, right? So we're now using it for a typical purpose of things where we want to find out some real facts.
More often than not, it's very useful. It's not gibberish. I don't know what you're putting in.
Depends on what you're looking for, right?
Unless you ask it what year it is now.
Exactly. Like there's all sorts of things, and we cannot guarantee a semantic relationship to real world meaning anymore. We can't guarantee it. And that's the thing, because it hasn't been designed like this, but it's capable as a data generation machine, but without any connection. Okay, this is probably getting a little bit deep into some direction that should be a focus of a paper rather than this podcast.
Nick, they fixed the date, so now if you ask Google, it will tell you the right year. But that was an issue a couple of weeks ago. But I think what I would say is what you're talking about, especially when we get to LLMs, that is what makes, for me, questions of data production and data quality so interesting. And one of the things that you were talking about, for example, in LLMs, we sort of think they have a relatively good notion of concepts because they read, for example, Wikipedia, Reddit, and so on. Another thought experiment I've been thinking about, I noticed around the time when the Gulf of Mexico was renamed in the US to Gulf of America.
Did that happen? Is it officially the Gulf of
Well,
America
on
now?
Google it did, I think.
So when you went to some LLMs, they were very confused because they had competing data. Some sources were calling it Gulf of Mexico. Some sources were calling it Gulf of America. So the source data was conflicting, right, for these models, and it also depending on where you were based, because some countries acknowledged, accepted the change of name, and others still call it the Gulf of Mexico. So I think what makes it so interesting in questions of data quality, right? Because then which data is the quality data that goes into these systems, and how can we measure it? So that's one thing that I would say, that the data landscape for LLMs becomes so much more complex because it's different sources, different models, working differently and producing outputs for people in different places of the world. So it becomes
Yeah,
so much more. And of course,
that's
I'm
interesting.
thinking this through, and I don't have it all disentangled, but it becomes really fascinating in this sense.
Well, Recker, real quick before you go on to your next step, I do want to tell Recker what you told me before we started the podcast here, Marta. Recker, what Marta told me is that she thought we were not ambitious enough renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. She thought we should have she thought we should have named the Atlantic Ocean the Gulf of America. And
Yeah,
I agree
right.
with you, Marta. I think we were not as
And
ambitious
now
as
we
you.
created a piece of data that people will
Right.
believe that will be fed in some sort of system, and now this rubbish is going to stick on forever. That's exactly the point.
I
The
admit
Gulf.
to nothing. I
Yeah,
admit to
exactly.
nothing.
So, so what I'm hearing here, Mara, is it's a very powerful argument that clearly in the age of AI, we need to pay more attention to data. Is that fair to say? And I'm not sure about I would say that so far we've always looked more at information and data processing and the nature of the algorithms and whatnot. That was more of a focus than the data. And you make it basically saying like the data is more important than the algorithm. um, I don't know about these
Well,
things,
and the
but
data is a problem, right? I
and
think
the
your
data is
your
a
point
problem, and
about
that's
Gulf of America,
I totally agree with that as well. And I wonder if we can say more than the argument we made last year at the PDW said, oh, people go back and read the classics. I mean, that's a classical argument. It always holds true. And of course, your data studies bibliography is a wonderful resource. It's a one-stop shop. And it also tells you, look, 150 papers and about 20, 30 books. This is not niche. I mean, that's a pretty established track record of knowledge around everything data and information systems. But what do we do now? Like, how do we move forward? Do we need a special issue on data? What do you think?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
I think so.
Any
But
other
now to
questions,
unpack
Recker?
my to unpack my answer a little bit, I think to go back to what you said about reading the classics, I think that this is a very important starting point for anyone who wants to get into this field, because we cannot understand what is different now if we don't understand how things were before whatever has changed, right? And this is why I would say yes, we need to start there. We need to go there. I think that what we've been noticing that has been happening is that there is something different, and there are opportunities in which we can build on and expand on that literature. And some things or some phenomena that I think are happening right now that it would be great if we looked into are, for example, synthetic data. And that's something that I think about
Oh
a
yeah.
lot.
Oh yeah.
And that is, Jan, also what we talked about in that PDW that you mentioned. This in its extreme form is a type of data that either has no referent or the referent completely doesn't matter. And in cases where synthetic data are created as to specifically not represent the real world, and to give a concrete case of that in fraud detection in banks, they create synthetic data sets where 99% of transactions are fraudulent.
Yeah.
And 1% not, because they need the fraudulent transactions, artificially generated fraudulent transactions, to teach the models on how a fraudulent transaction could look like. Because what happens in the real world is less than 1% of transactions are fraudulent. So it's not enough training data, right?
Yeah.
So that is an interesting question, right? What kind of data, if we have always or so far defined data as, a representation or a record of something that exists in the world, and all of a sudden we have synthetic data that by its own makeup, it's not this.
Yes.
Is it still data, or do we need a different definition of data?
First of all, that's a powerful example. The other one, I think that's the one that you mentioned this year at the AOM, is this entire point about data curating, data labeling, data work. Some of the guys at VU, like Tomislav and others, they study data work as part of the AI systems. I would add to this, I know a known practice that deals with the small data problem in machine learning AI algorithms. Like Tesla's example had this problem that you have some really weird street signs. And even if you have millions and millions of data points about cars driving on roads, like very specific situations, they only have 7 or 8 examples of, right? And one of the common practices is that you artificially inflate these. You literally take that data set and copy and paste it a few times. So you have a few hundred entries, and then you maybe change a few of these parameters. And in a way, if you think about this representationally, you're faking a reality that's not there, right? And then another common practice is that you take that and you create an inverse of that. So you create an opposite, as a whitelist, blacklist kind of thing to train an algorithm. So these are standard practices. We do them all the time. We double data sets, we create inverses, we do all the things that in the science context we would call fraud and get, put people in jail for, basically, except that we don't.
So this whole idea of simulated data being ground truth, I think, is something that takes us back to Baudrillard. Like, are you guys familiar with his idea of simulacra and and hyperreality? So he's French, so of course he was talking about like sex and pornography. But the idea is that the art that represents the reality becomes hyper elements of that, and then that becomes the thing that people base themselves on. So I think we're seeing it in a lot of the content so let's think about movies, for example. There's a lot more video out there that's fictional movies than there is, say, news coverage, for example, at this point. So whether it's Netflix, Amazon, so you can create these models based on fictional movies. We're going to have really, really good knowledge about, say, how to deal with zombies, right? So these things don't exist, but we're going to have incredible knowledge, incredibly well-developed knowledge about dealing with zombies and vampires that don't exist, because the data set that is going to be this simulated reality. And then maybe some of the things that actually do exist will have far less data because of this simulated nature. So you're talking about fraud detection, but I think a lot of what we're putting online, and this is probably where we get to the fake news stuff and whatever, the simulations are going to drive the knowledge, and it's very hard to tell what knowledge do we have from simulations versus what knowledge do we have that is valid, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I was thinking also in relation to Baudrillard's argument, I was thinking, again, it's a question that keeps coming back to me. What is different now? And I would say that, in his argument, we create that hyper reality, but at least it's a hyper reality that we sort of all share. So we live in the same hyper reality. But in here, what I'm thinking, and again, I haven't maybe thought it through to its logical conclusion, but you made me think about it, Nick, is when we each work with a different LLM and we have a different data that goes in, it creates a different hyper reality for every
one
single
of us.
user. So it creates individual prismed out hyperrealities based on that data.
And this is a little bit the argument by that's also in the Nexus book, right? Nick, you gave that to me and I read it now. And this is the real right. If you moved from a objective information network to an intersubjective network towards something that is just an entirely solipsistic information network, my world, my LLM, my knowledge, my data, most of the decisions that I get from, my Google search will be different from yours already. Then that's exactly what we're creating then. And then we have no shared truth or ground for anything.
Well, yeah, except, so I would push back on that a little bit. I think that's an interesting thought experiment to play around with. But in reality, we're social beings. We only, our cognition, I'm from a social cognitive kind of perspective, right? Where our cognition is shaped by our language. This is Wittgenstein. Our experiences are shaped by our language. Our language is shaped by our social connections, our family, our communities. I think we are social beings. We will always have intersubjective common ground, at least with some group. Now, maybe it's not universal, but I don't believe it was ever universal. I don't believe we had universal truth. I think we had whether there is or isn't a universal truth. I think we as humans could never achieve it, and we never agreed on it. We always had our we continue to have, and we'll always have our sub community. So I'm not sure there's something different there. There might be. But hey, we're getting wrapped around the axle here, my brother. Marta, you do this to us. I think you did this
exactly.
to us.
That's what I was thinking. Like, Nick, see where this is taking us. This is the most deep, substantive
this is not our usual
we've ever had on the
conversation.
podcast. Exactly. We went deep here, Marta. This is what you do to people. You're too brilliant for all of us. And we're just trying to catch up with you.
That is the biggest compliment I could have ever asked for. I think one of my ambitions or objectives in life is to think as deeply as I can. If I hear that I made somebody else think, that is, for me, mission accomplished.
That's good for you, Marta.
He tries not to think.
And think about the podcast. This is wonderful, but no one's going to listen to this. It's way too deep.
Sorry.
But no, you are Marta, because I know you're also studying. You started studying a new subject. You took a new course in class because you want to learn and really deeply understand that. Isn't that right? I mean, it's a little bit what Brad Greenwood has been doing when he took a legal degree, and you're doing the same thing. I mean, this is scholarship at its finest. It really is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's just it. The next generation is safe. We have Brad Greenwood and Marta Stelmaszak. Right? We have the two of them. We have a couple intellects.
We have many more.
When young Jen gets old and retires, at least we have Marta. All right. So I have become, Wrecker, a big fan of Marta. I think her work is excellent. You go read her papers, and I think it is. And I like this bibliography of data. Yeah. And I might have to go back and read some of the old stuff on data.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad to hear that this work has been useful. And I look forward to having many more conversations about data crossover with philosophy.
Beautiful.
That's true, actually. All right. Thanks so much, Marta, for coming on. This has been a great episode. Many ideas here. And we'll put a link up to your work and, of course, the data studies bibliography. And there's also the new handbook on data, right, that you're editing. When is that coming out? Next year?
Yes. Yeah, this will be coming out in early 2026. So thank you for mentioning it as well. And this is an edited volume, research handbook on digital data, interdisciplinary perspectives. So we have some great chapters in there. So that's going to be
They didn't invite me
great.
to do a chapter, did they?
Well, they invited me. Take that.
They did?
Nick.
Oh. Well, all right.
What do you got to do about it?
I have to. I'll think of something, Nick.
You could do the little blurb that goes in the cover.
Yeah, I'll do that. There you go. That way,
right. Marta, Nick, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Marta.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.